Let me make sure I have it up.
How do I spell your name on Instagram? What are you on Instagram?
Yep. So I just so I see you on Instagram. So it's Janie Lacy with the LACY.
There it is.
Let me just
there
join.
it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There it is. Got you. Okay. That should be doing it. You've joined?
No,
I believe you've joined. No?
No, there we go. I'll send you a request.
There you are. Go live with Janie. This is going to be exciting, guys. So just stick around. It won't be too long. I've just got you waiting now. Technology. It's happening. We're connecting. There we are. The only thing is that it's going to. There. How's that?
Yeah.
Cool. That shouldn't interfere with anything.
I can hear you, and I just see a message. Somebody let us know on Facebook if you can hear us. And you're going to have to comment on the comment section because I'm using my phone, so I can't see the messages coming in.
Cool.
So Mary's saying no audio. Anyone else can't hear us? If someone else can comment so we can have a second person letting us know if you can hear our audio just fine. Okay, someone else, everyone says they can hear, so maybe it's just
right.
Mary, your make sure your volumes are up. Everyone else said they can hear us, and it looks like we are good on Instagram. So,
yeah.
So while we're waiting for a few people to join, Steph, so welcome to the United States. You've been living here for a while. So how is it in California?
Yeah, it's good. So it's good being in California. I love Southern California. It's an amazing place, and yeah, really blessed. Got my green card a month or so ago, a couple of months ago, and that's been pretty cool. Yeah,
that is awesome. So is there a date set? We're all waiting.
Yeah, getting married at the end of the year in September.
So exciting. I'm so happy for you. Congratulations. I cannot wait to meet your lovely fiance. People are asking for me to get a sponsor to bring you both here.
Yeah, that would be so good. And yes, I've got to reply back to you. Actually, you asked me a question. I completely forgot about that. Sorry, but I'll come back to you on that. We'll talk about that.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure.
We'll circle back around.
Yeah.
You know, this has just been a topic that, and obviously, you know, you and I got connected probably about a year and a half ago through our dear friend Melanie Garcia. I've been following your work, Reclaim Your Kingdom, and it has a special place in my heart, Steph. So I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to tell you why. So I'm here in my office and doing therapy. You know, I'm a big fan of the women empowerment movement, right? So I have Women Redeem, I have Safe Haven, speaking to a women's group this Thursday. And there's a constant pattern that I'm seeing, not only with the couples that I work with, but also a consistent complaint. I kind of look for patterns and then dive into those patterns. And what I would see is a lot more women, and I'm going to be using some general terms, and then I want to get your perspective on this. But I see a lot of women that are now operating from the masculine side of them in decision making and just really being able to get into these relationships. And part of it, right, is looking at everyone's different. Is their patterns, toxic patterns, those types of things, their own woundedness as women, but finding men that in the beginning, things seem really great, right? So I'm making a general situation that I'll see. But at some point, there's something to fix in him. There's something to fix, and they have to become the decision makers. Many women are now becoming the breadwinners. Men are relying more on women than ever financially, making decisions and taking this passive role in the relationship. And then it creates this pattern that happens where she's frustrated, feels like he's not being the man, he's not helping, making decisions, and she taking that masculine role. She's overwhelmed, she's tired, she has many hats that she's wearing. You know, we can look at the typical family structure, raising the kids, making sure things are set, being the CEO of the household, CEO of the company. I can go on and on and on. So I'm going to just start by asking you the big question. What is the state of our masculinity today? What is happening to our men?
It's confused. It's confused. It really is. People asking what is the definition of masculinity. I definitely have definitions of masculinity, and I've been exploring this for some time. And when you ask what is the state of masculinity, like femininity, actually, it's pretty confused right now. We live in a society where fluidity is reigning supreme. And when there's fluidity, we're moving. Now, fluidity is not wrong because it's a transition period, right? But there's so much fluidity in how we see ourselves, how we relate to each other, how we see the world, how we behave, how we treat ourselves, that we're walking on unstable ground that doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel secure, and it doesn't feel familiar either. And so we're plucking at straws with how we're behaving. And so I'm just getting a comment here on Instagram saying that it's amplifying. I wonder, I'm not sure what to do with that. Anyway, okay.
So just turn your speakers off so that you can't hear yourself. That should help.
I have, yeah, I've definitely done that. I've put it as low as I can, so I'm hoping that stops doing that.
Okay, yeah, sound better now.
Yeah, okay. So we live in a state of affair. We live in a state of affairs that are bringing us confusing times, and we're not sure how to behave. And so what once was, and this is such a complex issue, what once was so clear in terms of what our roles were as men, what our roles were as women per se, those lines are very blurred now. Again, this isn't about wrong or right. It's just that they're very blurred, so they're confusing times. In addition to that, we have something called gender fluidity, where no more is there a binary gender. No more is there men and women, technically speaking, that we have 60 plus, at least, if not more, 70 plus forms of identifying gender. That's confusing. That's confusing. It's not about right and wrong. It's just confusing because it's so new. And it being new, there are going to be transition periods. And so one of the dominant expressions in this world, and so let me go back a little bit just for a moment. The general consensus, is this right or wrong? We're seeing this, but let's just go with this idea for a moment. The general consensus is that if you're a man, your more natural state is that of masculinity. If you're a woman, your more natural, quote unquote, natural state is that of femininity. And so when we're talking about different expressive types that we experience as human beings, you as a man, you lean more towards masculine archetypes or masculine expression. As a woman, you lean more towards feminine expression. We'll go into what that is in a moment. And so one of the dominant expressions in the world today is centers around goal orientation. It centers around doing and productivity. It centers around accumulation and status. Those aspects of the human expression of the human condition are more masculine orientated. And so if you're not doing that or being that, if you're not encompassing that, if you're not behaving in that way, you're on the outskirts. No one likes to be in the out groups. No one wants to be in an out group. We all want to be in the in group. From a biological perspective, from the way we survive, we all want to be in the in group because it feels safer to be so and do so. And so we're finding more women stepping into their power, which is a beautiful thing, by the way, as a side note. And they're also doing so at times, which is similar to what you've expressed, at the expense of their own femininity, because they almost have to survive in a world that is dominated by this expression. The expression itself is not wrong. We require productivity and doing energy, and we require goal orientation, and we require that to survive. But when we obsess about that at the expense of other virtues such as compassion and care and beingness and observation, witnessing, which are also masculine traits, but observation and witnessing are, but we put them on the back burner to achieve and to accumulate. This is a problem. And we're finding disparity in how we communicate and connect.
So when you think about just, I read a recent post that you had about just men being able to feel all of their women, and they can do that after they master all of themselves. Could you share with us, what does that mean for men when they master all of themselves, that they can be better responders to the women in their life?
Yeah. So the premise behind that is that we explore our wounding. And if we explore our wounding as men, our fears, our pain points, the traumas that we've experienced, essentially we do the inner psychological, psycho-emotional work to create spaciousness within us, we're able to feel the world from a very different place. And in doing so, we allow others to see us as well, a wholer version of ourselves. Because now we're not behaving from a place of fracture and being broken or being driven by these unconscious beliefs, behaviors, models of reality that we've used, that we've utilized as children as coping strategies or compensatory strategies to help us deal with pain and difficulty. Now, instead of coming from that pain and that wounding and that fear, we're able to come from a greater place of clarity. Then people will gravitate towards us, and we can gravitate towards meaningful, healthy relationships that can help us to continue to expand.
So when you think about, we hear there's books being written in the last several decades, women continue to have same opportunities as men in the workplace, as we mentioned before, bringing in just as much or more money. But yes, we also understand that women can still argue that they're still undervalued. So I'm not addressing that. But when you think about the alpha female and men being able to comfortably operate from their masculine, again, generally speaking, their masculine space, and for her to respond from her feminine space, what are some of the things, especially with your Reclaim the Kingdom? And I'm going to ask you in a minute, what was the passion and the drive behind that for men? But what would that look like as far as a healthy man operating in his masculine energy, where he doesn't feel demasculated, but he could also can respond to using his feminine side to respond to his woman and her needs and the internal intimacy of their relationship?
And so the women that I speak with and the women that I connect with in my clients, and when I work with women in groups, or when I'm speaking to women at an individual basis, at an individual level, what I'm finding is that they yearn to be feminine in their relationships. They yearn to be led. They yearn to be received. They yearn to be understood and connected to in their relationships. And so what a man must do essentially to meet a powerful woman in relationship is to not meet her with a hyper masculine tone, to not meet her in such a way that oppresses her or subjugates her or overpowers her or overbears her, overstrengthens her. That's not going to help in any capacity. It's not going to help bring balance and homeostasis into the relationship. And so if the feminine is to really deeply behave and come from her feminine, she needs to be met with a healthy masculine. And in this case, it's a king energy that directs the feminine, that asks the feminine to be this type of person by being that type of person himself. So, for example, being patient, being able to lead a situation without anger, without overt aggression, and being able to hold that storm that may be weathered right there. But let me go a little bit deeper than that, because time and space is a domain of the masculine. This is something that I learned. I was at a course a number of weeks ago, and it was a men's embodiment course, and we went deep into this course and we started to understand, what does it mean to be a man that can lead? Okay. And so that didn't mean that if the woman in the relationship is being upset or being hyper expressive, that the man just takes that. The man can hold space for that and also set time and space around that. And so what the man does essentially is set the parameters for, I want you to express. I want you to feel safe to express. I want you to be here and present, and I'm hearing everything you're saying. And at some point, it's very healthy that if this is continuing, we cut it, we come back to it. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 3 hours, maybe it's tomorrow. But when the masculine orchestrates that time and space, but he does that with gentleness. And you're talking about the integration of feminine, gentleness, compassion, empathy, understanding. These are feminine virtues, but a man can hold them strong within him. And he does that from a place of stability and certainty and clarity. That's the empowerment part. That's where that balance of masculine, feminine within a relationship can begin to flourish more.
So to those that are tuning in on Instagram and on Facebook, if you have any questions or comments, just please go ahead and write them as we are going along. So what comes to mind, Steph, when you're talking about a man that can lead? So with working with women that are coming out of patterns of toxic relationship, they've had failed relationships after failed relationships, and they now have taken on a dominant masculine position that are working towards a healthy state of being. So what would it look like from your perspective of a man that can lead from that healthy place, but also understanding the woman's wounded heart as she's continuing to work through that? What have you seen with the men that you've worked with and Reclaim Your Kingdom, and what would be your advice to them?
Men are very quickly, and not just men, we are very quick to make judgments. We judge the moments. And when we judge the moments, we limit the moments. We limit the experiences of that. And so we look at someone's behavior and we take for granted at a prima facie level what's happening. So at a superficial level, we're experiencing someone's behavior and we think that that's all the behavior is. And so when we don't hold compassion and patience and non-judgment in that moment and seek to ask what's really going on and see beyond the actual expression, I'm not saying don't take for value, for surface value, what's actually happening. And of course, learn to set healthy boundaries, whether you're a man or a woman, of how you're treated and how someone's expressing to you, but also seeing beyond, peeling back the layers of expression and behavior. Because more often than not, it's a call out, it's a cry for help, it's a cry to be seen, it's a cry to be experienced in a particular way. It's someone is crying out to be heard for the first time ever potentially, and they're testing the waters. And so many people, depending on their wounding, and this isn't exclusive to women, of course, in any capacity. I used to do this a great deal because I was so codependent in my behavior. I would push the boundaries of how I treated others to see if they would remain in the relationship with me, and I was testing them, but I didn't even know I was doing that. It was so unconscious. But what I was really doing was pushing them away every time that happened. And so the way we meet that wounding is not by reacting or retaliating or pushing it away, but by meeting it with compassion. And in that sense, that's masculine leadership for me. That's an ability that a man is astute enough to see that in this instance, the woman that he's with is crying for help or is looking to find safety in her environment for the first time, maybe after being in so many unhealthy relationships, or that she's looking for someone to trust or for someone to hear her without judgment in his way, in a masculine way that can hold and listen and not try and fix and not try and give commentary to what she's saying, but just to really hear her. Something that I hear often is, I just wish my man would listen. Just listen. Doesn't have to say anything, doesn't have to fix, doesn't have to offer suggestions, but we go to that because, again, it's a dominant masculine paradigm is how do we fix the issue? We look at it this way, we start to analyze, we compartmentalize, we're very good at doing that. The truth of it is, male brains and female brains are different. This is demonstrated and proven. Culturally, the cultural influences that we have in our lives, we are different. And we're also the same in different respects. And both are acceptable and they need to be. And so for me, masculine leadership is our ability to show up and see beyond what's actually being expressed, especially in times of disarray or times of difficulty and challenge. That's very important for masculine leadership in this context.
So basically what you're saying is still using that strength of fix it, but in a different way. They're seeing beyond that moment and being able to also, I would imagine, what you're saying is being connected to their feminine energy, to the woman that's in front of them, but they're also in a confident place and they've gotten that place over time. So when we look at just, we have a great anger management program that we've been running here for years here at Life Counseling Solutions. And one of the things that I'll hear from, I'm no longer facilitate that class, but when I was facilitating that class, the one thing that we would constantly hear, and I imagine they're still hearing it from men, is that we didn't learn how to express our emotions. It's not manly to express our emotions. And now she wants me to express my emotions, right? So sometimes there's this resistance because feelings are to them a weaker or a feminine quality. So when you think about, because I know in the past you've even shared your own journey. So when you think about a man that's on that journey, that he's also trying to connect and have healthier relationships with his feminine energy, his female counterpart, but yet he comes from that rigid mentality that men don't express their feelings, men don't cry, and then he's having difficulty in his relationship. So when you are taking your men through the Reclaim Your Kingdom, what are some of the conversations that you have with them so they can understand that it's a healthy part of being human, of being a man?
Yeah. Well, I first let them know that we all have limbic systems. And so limbic systems are somewhat responsible, or at least help regulate our emotional selves and our emotional beings. And we all have them, unless, of course, you've been lobotomized, and therefore you wouldn't have one, but that's very doubtful because the limbic system is responsible for a lot more than just emotional regulation. And so that's a starting point. The next part is that, here's the thing, when we look at our evolutionary behaviors and we look at what we understand, and when we look at ourselves from an evolutionary perspective, it was actually imperative that men were able to regulate their emotions more often than not, more so than women, because our responsibility was to extend and protect the perimeter. Our responsibility, because we carried greater physical prowess, was to hunt and to survive and to basically ensure that we have food and that we have shelter and that we're able to build and construct that. And so emotions would get in the way at times of survival, if we look at it from that perspective, to some degree. And so it's not that men need to cry at the drop of a hat, not at all. It's that we have to have access to how we feel. There will be times, of course, in situations where we have to delay our emotions. We have to delay feeling fully, whatever the reasons may be. An example is war, or an example is being in a confrontational situation, where sometimes curling up in a ball and crying and being sad and being completely frightened is actually not going to help you survive. And you have to, if anything, you have to be aggressive, or you have to think really sharply and be very confident in your own being and either get away or move forward, or whatever it may be. And these are real life situations that happen. The point is, and more importantly, is that as men, we need to have range. We need to have access to a range of emotions, because I equate that to having a tool belt around our waist, and that tool belt only being 20% full if the only emotion we have, for example, is anger or frustration or jealousy. What about sadness? What about the feeling of abandonment? What about having the ability, because that's emotional fitness and emotional intelligence, to express how we're feeling in that moment, but to do it from what I call a vertically vulnerable way? You mentioned confidence earlier. So it's imperative that men, when they're leading, they develop this confidence and certainty in self, but that comes from doing the work, exploring their shadow self, exploring their traumas, exploring their pain points and their fears, dealing with them, coming from a wholer place in life. Then they can be confident. Then they can carry certainty. Then when they're crying or they're expressing their feelings, or they're saying, hey, what your behavior, I love you, but I do not like your behavior, and this is why it's really upset me and it's made me sad, and it reminds me, that behavior reminds me of a time in my life when I was younger and this was done to me and I experienced that. And the ability to articulate that is everything in relationship, right? It's everything. Does it mean that the man needs to be a blubbering mess? No, but there may be times when a man needs to have that level of expression. Should he be doing that with the woman in his life? The answer is yes and no. It just depends on the situation, on so many variables. But having a band of brothers, having a group of men that he can rely on, that he trusts, respects, and reveres, that he can go to and be challenged and also be supported, that's important to have as well. And that's something that I really teach massively in men, because so many men feel isolated in the world.
You know, you are speaking my language, Steph. You're talking about pain points and trauma, because I think a lot of times people try to cut those parts off of them, or they are living in denial. They don't want to acknowledge it, or they'll say, you know, they feel disloyal to their parents or to their childhood or whatever it may be. So then when they get into relationship, not being able to acknowledge or be in denial of their parts, not looking at how potentially, especially for men, what I'll see with some of my male sex addicts that I work with is that they have an overly enmeshed mom that, you know, she wasn't getting her needs met through her husband. So she was using her sons to get her emotional needs met. So when they move too close with their wives or their girlfriends, it feels smothering, and then they sabotage the relationship. But yet they'll find other ways and not want to look at those parts to see how that past is contributing to their current situation. So a big part of doing the work is addressing the traumas, is addressing the lessons and their wounding. We all have wounding, and you talk about the passenger side, the dark side. You know, we can use those sides, and I would imagine this is what happens in Reclaim Your Kingdom is we can use those sides to empower us, and that's how it loses its power over us. Is we empower it, we acknowledge the and excuse me,
make it known.
Talking about these parts, you know, the little boy inside of us or the little girl inside of us, we empower those voices because, you know, and when I sit with couples and I'm looking at it from an objective standpoint and she'll say, well, he's acting like a child, or, you know, why don't you stop? There's some truth to that, right? Because that little girl inside of her, that little boy is now having a tantrum, and then they're becoming reactive to the relationship versus responsive. So talk to us a little bit about when you are taking men through the program and you're helping them now be responsive to their emotions versus reactive to their emotions. What are some of the processes or the hurdles? So all the men that are tuning in, or the women that have men in their life, the hurdles that they need to do to get over that place where they could be more responsive to her emotions and not be threatened by them.
Firstly, I want to say that I resonate with the example that you gave around enmeshment and entanglement, because I experienced that with my mother as well. I had an absent father and a very violent father, and so her needs weren't being met by my father, and so she projected emotionally those needs onto me, and I became an adult from a very young age, and so I can really relate to that and the damage that I did because I allowed that shadow to run my life for so long in my intimate relationships as an adult, and that's a big thing. There's a pain points around that. But to answer your question, I help men get acquainted with the deeper parts of themselves and even, quote unquote, the darker parts of themselves. So, for example, I work with different men, different types of men. I work with men that have cultivated tremendous outward success but do not feel fulfilled, like material wealth, status, etc., but they do not feel fulfilled. Then I work with men that are so humiliated in their being. They're so passive. They're meek and they're weak in their demeanor, and they cannot express themselves and stand up for themselves. Many of those men, as an example, have not dealt with any of their real pain. They suppress their frustration. They suppress their anger. They suppress all the times they haven't been understood, they haven't been heard, they haven't been seen, they haven't been felt. They suppress all the times they wanted to say something because someone was mistreating them, but they did not, and they walked away, and that compounds and it drives them, and they're this ball that is waiting to explode, or they're just so disorientated and isolated from the world. They cannot communicate with their partners, and they're people pleasers, and they take this hyper feminine role in the relationship, super passive, whatever you want, or we'll do whatever you need. And they take no responsibility for the relationship, and their partners love them and see the gentleness in them, but it's actually not gentleness, it's fear. And so that fear is driving the relationship, and that's not attractive. And so the relationship veers. And so what I do with men is I actually help them get really fucking angry. I help them get that anger out in a healthy way. There are techniques and tools that we use. Psychodrama is part of it. I call it, there's a neurological shake process that I help them move through that is accompanied by a visualization process and a physical process that's involved in that as well. We can do that in person, or we can do that, we can be over the phone, teleconference, video, it doesn't really matter. It's very, very, very liberating, especially once we cultivate trust. Once I cultivate trust and develop trust and transparency in that relationship, and I do that as quickly as I can, of course, we're able to go to those places, and the relief that men have, they're able to step into their power because they feel it for the first time. And they feel that they're allowed. They don't judge themselves, because somewhere in their life, many times someone said to them, don't be that way. Don't express that. Don't think like that. Don't be angry, or don't tell anyone what you think, because that's dangerous. Or they witness that. They witness the unhealthy relationship of their primary caregivers or primary adult role models in their life. And they suppress so much. Now, once we break through and I'm able to physiologically get a release from them, that creates spaciousness. And of course, there's integration that takes place after that. Integration and healing. We go through a process of that. And part of that is discourse, part of that is self-praxis, part of that is solitude, part of that is self-care and nurturing, part of that is continued consistent expression. Then we go into getting clearer on what we want and how we want to be in the world without judgment. We work through the judgments and the fears and all of that. And that's a process, right? That's a lot. But you know what? This stuff is deep and it's entrenched in us and it's painful, Jane. Like people want, we live in a society, especially in the US, it's a quick fix society. Oh, give me a pill and let me take it away. No, it doesn't work like that. It just does not work like that. You can do a lot in 10 minutes. Absolutely. And you need integration and consistency to repattern yourself neurologically, behaviorally, habitually, viscerally, emotionally, relationally. Otherwise, you're going to the ego will default to what it's familiar with and comfortable with because that's safe. And so they have to break that pattern, let them know they can be very, very different and wild in their expression and still be safe and know that they can get through it. Wow, I just got through that. I was so angry, but I'm not angry anymore and I feel free. Or maybe I can do that again. Yeah, I'm keen. I'm shy, but I'm keen now. That's powerful.
And what I hear you say is action builds courage. So people want the outcome, but to do that process, it's like tearing yourself open and looking at all your guts and all the dark stuff and all the things that you've done. So one of the private messages that came in, I'm actually going to roll it into something that that you said, because they're asking about healthy sexuality in men. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier about helping men express their anger, and you're probably familiar with this term, but we look at eroticized rage. So sometimes men they're unhealed parts, and women can do this too, but we're talking primarily about men right now, is that they're looking for their validation by having multiple women. They're looking for that validation that I'm a man. Sometimes it can come from my perspective. It can come from untreated childhood sexual abuse. It can come from emotional neglect, or it can come from societal messaging that men get their validation by how many women they can score and those types of things. So the person's pretty much asking what your perspective is with the men that you work with, as far as what does healthy sexuality look like for men that can benefit their relational dynamics with women? It's a powerful question.
Yeah, powerful, great question. Yeah. And so everything you outlined then, I was that man as well, very much so. And I was coming from that validation for myself. I was doing all of that in secrecy and more. And again, it's not so much the platform now. I mean, it's not the platform. It's just I want to be honoring the question, but I really relate to a lot of that. And so how can men be in their prime sexual health? How can they orientate healthily in the world? And so for me, sexuality comes down to 3 posturings. I call them posturings. The first is the art of sexual movement, sexual momentum. I call it sexual momentum in space. In other words, the act of sex. There's projection. Sexual projection is, are we leaky with our sexual energy? Are we clear about what we're doing with our sexual energy? Are we giving subconscious messages to people without knowing that we are, and it's a confused energy? Or are we really clear with what we want sexually and who we are? And how we get clear is, again, we sift through the shadow work, we do the work, we do the deeper work with respect to who we are, and we get clear on what our sexual desires are, our sexual orientation, our sexual preferences in terms of relationship type, our sexual fantasies. And we come face to face with them. We don't let them live in the shadows. We own them. This is who I am. Because when you own who you are, and then you can confidently be that in the world, and at the beginning it's not so much confident, but when you can be that in the world with people that you trust, that are safe, and that can give you healthy feedback, you begin to develop a truer sense of self. And the next part, the last part, is our sexual life force, which is our personality, which is everything that we are in the world. And it's not just about sexual energy, it's how we ground in the world. It's an integration of our sexual energy here in our in our sexual erogenous zones, integration of our heart and our emotional centers, and also our intellect and our consciousness. And when we integrate these 3 parts of ourselves, we're able to be clearer in our sexual expression. We're not manipulative. We're not underhanded. We're not shallow in the way we move. We don't tell lies in order to receive short-term immediate gratification. We're not coming from wounding and pain that we need a quick fix and that we associate ejaculation or having a woman or getting a woman or picking up a woman or having 3 women in 1 week or 10 women in 1 week. We don't associate that with, oh, we're a man now. We redefine our sense of masculinity because we don't need to. We're not codependent on how others see us or how much sex we have or how many women we attract to feel validated and a full sense of self. Our fullness comes from us. Now, that's a big journey. It's a big undertaking. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy, because it's not. And it's well worth it, because it's so liberating and so freeing on so many levels. I'm speaking from extremely direct experience.
You know, and when we look at especially healthy sexuality in general, what I'll see is another component is a lot of times, this is men and women, but men also, I see early on, are learning their sexual education through pornography. Right. So yes. I'm a certified sex addiction therapist. Right. So it's my world where I'll see the results of it, in the sense that the early exposure that can happen, and then get an unhealthy view that when they are being sexual with women, that women are always turned on, they always are wanted. And then there's this distorted view. But yes. The other hand that I'll see in our psychology world is that when women feel like they're operating dominantly in their masculine energy in their relationship, they'd have less desire for their partners sexually. So we'll look at their relationship in the bedroom, and if things are not happening, we normally are looking at what's happening in the relationship, communication. Or if you're looking at a parent-child relationship where you feel like you're operating out of the parent role and he's the child, you know, from a emotional standpoint, then it happens where if he was introduced to dysfunction sexually, he can go back to those dysfunctional ways as far as pornography and all those other things. So this is why the shadow side and the things that Steph is talking about matter. Is that I also believe when couples are getting together, no, you don't need to have a complete breakdown of their history, but you need to have a good outline of where they're coming from and what they've done to overcorrect it. Because it's like the Thanksgiving table to me, Steph, is you're bringing in all the ghosts of their past, all the beliefs, all the things that are untreated. It's going to be right at the table with you. So someone had sent a direct message wanting to know a little bit about, and I was going to get into this anyway, a little bit about your story and why this is such a passion for you with Reclaim the Kingdom and helping men have a healthy embracing of their masculinity. And you already touched on a few parts from your own history.
Yeah, Reclaim Your Kingdom for me was born from a need to be more connected to myself and really understand myself, know myself, feel myself at deeper levels through the world. And so I've already touched on a lot of this. I experienced enmeshment and entanglement, a very volatile environment, physically abused, emotionally abused by my parents, and watched them fight consistently so often, daily, actually, physically and emotionally. And that shaped much of my worldviews and the way I treated myself and treated others. And I was involved in prostitution and unfaithfulness and being so disconnected from being in relationship and really not being connected to what are the important aspects of me that want to come forward that are actually healthy. And I just kept operating from unhealthy places until that came to a head, and I was my relationship was unpacked basically with a woman that I was with, and she found out that I was being unfaithful. And from there, I really went down the rabbit hole of this just isn't acceptable anymore. This isn't the man I want to be. This isn't the type of human I want to be and how I want to be in the world. And I feel it's time for me to move beyond this, well beyond this. And so I made the choices to move beyond it. And continue to every day. It's an unraveling that takes time, of course. And so that was very important for me, because I realized that in order for me to achieve and experience congruency and integrity in my world, I had to show that up that way for myself. And I had to dig, and I had to look at everything that I was and ask myself, what's actually driving me? What's in the driver's seat right now? And it wasn't quote unquote me. It was all these past versions of me, these compensatory strategies, these maladaptive coping strategies that I was bringing into my adult relationships, these traumas and these woundings and these fears and these pains. And it was driving the way I gave and received love. And it was driving the way I saw myself, my sense of self-worth, the way I validated myself. Because validation is important. It's how we validate ourselves that's even more important. And validation is healthy, by the way. We need to validate ourselves because it course corrects us. But when we're constantly seeking validation from others or from unhealthy, deceitful, dark practices and experiences, anything that is dishonest, essentially is it's pulling us back from being in truth. And you know, we're very good at telling lies because we're very good at justifying our actions. And the more we tell lies, the more we lose ourselves because we're just wearing masks. We just keep wearing masks. You know, like when you're on Messenger and you're video conferencing with a friend and it gives you the options to wear all these different hats and sunglasses and masks. That's what we're doing. We're just wearing different masks. But we don't even know that we're wearing the masks. And we do that to protect ourselves, of course, to protect the ego, but also to protect our vulnerable heart, because we don't know how to be with the pain, the depth, and the suffering of those emotions. Maybe suffering is not the right word because that's more of an optional choice, but we don't know how to be with the pain of those emotions without actually suffering and crumbling or behaving in extreme ways to compensate for the pain that we're feeling.
And I want to make a few comments from the comments that are on Facebook. There is nothing wrong with women being dominant in the bedroom, right? That's a personal preference between you and partner. And lots of men actually like that, right? When the two of you are in your intimate relationship, that you also let them know that you desire them, that you love them, that you want them. Another comment is talking about that they love your transparency. And I think that's why I also wanted to bring you back on here, because in the state of, you know, for those that are just tuning in, we're talking about the state of masculinity in 2019 with Stefanos, who is has a program called Reclaim Your Kingdom that is for men. You know, when we look at people who are healthy, or when I look at people that are healthy and they actually do their work, what we're seeing is that they can be transparent, is that, you know, perhaps things that you're going through right in the moment, you don't want to, that's not processed. You don't want to necessarily be talking about those things in the public. But when you do the work, you're not threatened by the things that you have had happen to you. You've learned from them and you're able to use that as an education going forward. So I would imagine that's exactly what Steph does and Reclaim Your Kingdom, is sharing your own personal journey to let them know that you can understand, that you can relate, and being able to show them and talk to them about the process to get to the place that you're at. And then to also answer your question, Mary, absolutely, that when we look at dysfunctional patterns when it comes to internet pornography, right? That anyone that's looked at pornography, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But when you look at patterns, and that's primarily, we look at relational relief when it comes sexually to object relief. So if you're constantly going to pornography to receive your sexual relief, that's going to create a certain level of dysfunction. And that is not my study, but there are studies now, and I would imagine you're familiar with them too, Steph, that show pornography, erectile dysfunction, right? So we're looking at younger and younger men that are primarily getting introduced through sexuality, through pornography. And then when they're actually with an actual person, they cannot maintain an erection, right? So we can kind of go through that another time. So absolutely, yes, to your question. So when you think about another question that that I have that came through earlier through the direct message, was about brotherhood, that a lot of men in the past in history would bond over activities, whether it's through sports, through what would be considered a masculine way to relate. And with social media and with a lot of different things going on, I'm going from memory from the question, that there's more disconnection, and that generally speaking, the woman's comment was through the relationships that she's been with, that the men have not necessarily had a good brotherhood and good men, so that they become hyper-focused or codependent. I'm using the word codependent in the relationship, that they find insecurity if she has her own independence and those types of things. So could you speak to us a little bit from not only your work, but from a male's perspective, is the reason why, just laughing at Michelle's comment, brotherhood is so important in order to have healthy masculinity? What does that look like? Why is that important?
Yeah, so there's 5 tactical virtues that I speak of in the Reclaim Your Kingdom program, and that's about it lays the foundations for what it means to be good at being a man and being a healthy masculine man in the world. And it's one of the contributing factors. So one of those, and I'm not the originator of the 4 tactical virtues, but I've added one to it, and I've expanded on these tactical virtues. And so one of them is connectivity, and the connectivity speaks to the brotherhood, and it speaks to tribe, it speaks to the brethren. Because again, from an evolutionary perspective, when we look at how we've actually evolved in different settings, but with brothers, like with other men, that we've had skills that we've say to 3 or 4 or 7 men, there's been a band of brothers that have, again, protected the space, that have extended the perimeter of safety, that have hunted, that have survived, that have worked together, collaborating to be the best version of themselves that they can be in some sense, okay, in some artistic sense, so to speak, or some cultural sense, but more than anything else, to survive. And so each man has brought a set of skills, a mastery, a strength to that group. And each man has been able to formulate part of his identity, a decent part of his identity, through the dynamics of that group, how those men challenge him, how they support him, how they show up for him, and so forth. Now, if you go back hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, the level of consciousness and awareness and the brain development was different in terms of the social cohesion, but you get the picture in terms of what we're accustomed to and how we've evolved. So many men are isolated and alone in today's world. So many men are disconnected from today's world, from themselves and from others. They don't have friends to speak to. They don't have people, men they can trust, that they can exercise with, that they can spend time with, that they can go to with a problem. Many men don't have that. I've been very blessed that I've had that most of my life. And again, my family life that was so volatile forced me out of the home. And so I sought that connection elsewhere and I developed it. And I was good at developing it. And I became very astute at recognizing what men I can trust and and who I couldn't because of what I experienced. Many men just keep to themselves and isolate, and that's not healthy. And so it's imperative that you find a brotherhood. It's imperative that you first get clear on what you value, even if it's just some hobbies. Like, what's important to you as a man? Like, is archery something you want to try? That's maybe something new, or maybe you love stamp collecting, or you love playing rugby or NFL or something. Then join a weekend league and surround yourself with some men. There may not be men that resonate with you, but it's a starting point. That's how you learn. But you do first, you surround yourself with people that share common interests as a starting point, and then you go deeper into that. Then you go into the depth. Start at the superficial, then go into the depth. Society's problem is we spend too much time in the superficial. We overextend our welcome in the superficial. That's the issue in terms of how we relate to each other. And so 13, 15, 20 years down the track, we're still asking how the weather is. And we haven't traversed our traumas. We haven't traversed our pains. We haven't traversed, how we want to treat each other, what our sexual desires are, how we want to spend our time together or separately, because we just spend time in how was your day and how's the weather. We're more than that. That's a great starting point, but we've got to go beyond that. And so as men, start with what you value, what's important to you, some of your hobbies, some of your interests, things that are fun for you, and gravitate towards that and do that with other men as a starting point, especially physical movement, and especially coupling that with being in nature as well.
So going off of a comment that was made about finding true male friends that you can trust is a big challenge. So what I'm hearing you say is first being able to find some commonality around an activity or around a common hobby to put yourself in the right place at the right time. So then I have my own thoughts about this, but wondering what your thoughts are. So going to that comment, then at what point do you know and use discernment that other men are trustworthy? Because I would imagine if I kind of fill in the blanks with questions or statements for men that said that they can't find other men that are trustworthy or healthy, so they just stay away. I would imagine that comes from their own woundedness, whether it's from their fathers or being betrayed by other men. So the process of being able to find your tribe, what's your recommendation to men?
I mean, the immediate answer to that, it's a very subjective call, who you decide, who you trust and who you don't. And the reality is the more inner work you do on yourself, the more clear of a channel of discernment you become. The second is that if you really want to know how to trust someone quick, put yourself in a dangerous situation with them and observe what happens. But that's the reality of it. Like, go climb a mountain or go for an expedition and don't have many supplies and watch how they behave, and observe yourself, how you behave, and how you tackle that difficulty or that challenge. That's one way to actually really get, if you want to fast track, how do you trust men? But again, my process for that is working on yourself first. Get clear on you as a man. Like, what are your needs? What do you want to achieve in the world? What do you want to be and feel in the world? What's important to you? What values do you hold dear to you? What hobbies do you have? And hobbies are more than just something to pass time. Hobbies are activities that can actually bond us together because we're sharing mutual interests at a deeper level. And so that's a starting point. But ultimately, how you build trust in friendship is consistency, repetition, compounded time, and our ability to be willingness to work through difficulties. If they say something that offends us, how do we respond or react to that? If we're reacting and coming from our wounding, we're going to distance the relationship. If we can see beyond the superficial and maybe see that, hey, this person's coming from a wounded place and that's not what his intention is, can I stay with that and maybe help him heal, but also heal myself, heal aspects of me by meeting him where he's at. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have discernment around setting healthy boundaries with how someone treats you. Of course you do. But again, being patient, taking a 10-second breath and really observing what's unraveling.
Absolutely. And we are going to be wrapping up in 10 minutes. So if you have any other questions or comments, now would be the time to make those comments or questions. You know, what I would also add to that is that when we are unhealthy, which is why it's so important that we do our work, we're going to attract people that are unhealthy. So as we're on our journey of being healthy, is we don't come out the gate and trust people. I think that is discernment. They earn the trust in your life. And over time, when there's consistency in going through some of those values that Steph just outlined for us, hearing how they talk, are they talking more from a negative standpoint? Are they talking more about things that are bringing value, ideals about where they're going? I mean, you get some clues early on if that's the type of person that you want to be around. But I think getting exactly in the same place around activities, because you have to be able to show up. You know, you have to be able to show up and be able to have opportunities to even make new friends, and then understanding that things take time. So it's not going to just happen out the gate that you're going to have this brotherhood. It's they're going to need to know that they could trust you, and you're going to have to be able to look for the clues if they're going to be able to be trustworthy. So I think the best. Effort. You have to put in effort. You have to put in effort, and you have to realize it's a tennis match. It's going to work both ways, and you have to be able to be intentional. I think what I'll see sometimes with the men that I work with, you know, where it's easy for women to say, hey, let's meet up for coffee. You know, men don't necessarily, generally, that's something that they're not necessarily comfortable doing unless they're already comfortable with you. So that opportunity to be, whether it's sports or being in social settings, I think is great. So when you think about, just to kind of wrap up a few comments. So as we are continuing coming from, and I'm just making general statements, women are becoming more predominant as far as becoming more billionaires, more CEOs, being able to operate from strengths. You know, we had our first run of a female president. Where does all of that fit to where you see, in your opinion, for the state of men and masculinity as we continue to go forward, and the state of the world that we're in, as far as women becoming much more alpha, operating from their masculine, and then, as you mentioned, we have pansexual, we have gender neutral, we have all of these new terms when it comes to relationships and sexuality. What is just your own personal opinion when you are helping men be confident in their masculine energy to where we are continuing going in the future, and how can they reclaim their kingdom? And I'll throw on another question here. If you can share with us in that response, what does that even mean to reclaim your kingdom?
Yeah. So there's two parts to this. The first is we need to run our own race. And so there is an element of separation here, but rightly so, right? So, and I'll explain that in a moment. And the second is that we have to come together and unify our intentions and unify how we show up and express and relate with each other and be in the world. But in order to do that, in order to unify at some meaningful level, we have to run our own race or do our own work. And that's why men's work and women's work is so important. That's why people work is important, super important as well. But to be very direct, what I say to men is get confident in your own masculinity. No woman wants to be masculine, and no man wants to be feminine. That's just the way it is. Sure, we may exhibit and express masculine and feminine virtues and expressions, whether we're a man, whether we're gender neutral, whether a woman, whether we're whatever, however we identify ourselves with sexually. But the reality is no man wants to be a woman. No man wants to be purely feminine in the world. It's not a thing of nature and nurture. It's more what feels comfortable with us. And maybe, and I'm generalizing when I say that, so I'm very specific to generalize. But for the majority of us, that's not what we want to feel. So men need to just learn how to be healthy masculine men for themselves, not for someone else. How to show up in tension or difficulty or challenge for themselves, and to do that in the most healthiest way. If a man can't connect to his own sense of masculinity and his own sense of confidence and discernment and clarity and really believe in himself and have a greater level of self-awareness, he's only going to distance himself from women, from society, from that which he values and loves the most. And so what does it mean to reclaim your kingdom? It means to come back into sovereign power. It means to empower yourself to make decisions that are based on what you truly desire and want, not what your shadow desires, not what your little 8-year-old boy desires from a wounded place, because there's nothing wrong with a little 8-year-old boy that has joy in his heart and wants to be out in the world. That's cool. But when that boy is consistently wounded in coming up and showing up in your adult life, that's not healthy. And that's what reclaiming your kingdom means. Reclaiming your kingdom means being connected to self and being in the world with prowess and presence and confidence, being vertical and discerning. These are some of the attributes. Learning how to be good at being a man, which is another conversation for another time. That includes the 5 pillars of masculinity for me, and it includes the 5 tactical virtues. Then we can talk about what does it mean to be a good man. But that's in a sense, to answer your question, where I would start with, at least.
And what I also hear when I hear about reclaiming your kingdom is that if we look at the metaphor of a kingdom where the king is has resources, right? So I tend to think of the 3 Ps, that he's a provider. So he has an actual kingdom to provide for his family. Yeah. And then he has the resources to protect and then also plan for the future. So I like to think of those 3 Ps coming from in a general way, the masculine energy. And then raising a 7-year-old boy, some of the things that I feel like being proactive in parenting, I always say I'm a boy mom all the way, my son is all boy, is teaching him the ability to wait and have patience and self-control. So when I hear about some of the things that you're talking about and reclaiming your kingdom, about mastering yourself, that's what I tend to think of, so that you're not reaching out for and you're thinking through decisions in a very practical sense and not looking to non-relational things to medicate. And sometimes those things, if they are instilled in childhood, right? We look at society, 20% of society comes from secure home bases, meaning that they've gotten enough good stuff in their childhood to operate from a healthy point. The rest of us come from dysfunction. So we have to go through a process. It's just a matter of what that process looks like. So with just making a few comments, a couple of can't get to all of them, but one comment had that came through on Instagram is talking about spending time with can't read the whole thing, but if I think I'm understanding what you're asking, what I always talk about, whether you're female or male, is to understand someone's value system is to also see where they, and Steph and I would gladly hear your chime in on this, is to look at the contradictions or the consistency of their lives, to understand what their values that they don't have to tell you is going to be. If they're saying, I want to spend time, I love my family, but yet they don't spend any time with their family, there's going to be a contradiction there, right? So whenever there's contradictions, especially from my world, we're digging a little bit deeper to see what else is going on. So that's the way that I would say that if you're looking for men, or you're having friendships with men that eventually you want to date, is to look at not necessarily only what they say, but what they're doing in their actions, but also any contradictions that may come up.
Yeah, I'm just getting on here on Instagram, Janie, that you're not, then there's a few people that have just said they can't get your sound. There's no sound. They can't hear you. Not sure what that's about, but
Okay. Not sure there. Okay, I'm not sure.
That's cool.
Okay. There we go. Someone on Instagram, you can just let me know if you can hear me now.
I can hear you clearly. I've been able to
hear you. I can hear you clearly as well.
No, can't hear you.
Okay. Not sure. I'll not sure what to do about that part.
That's okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not sure if you have any other comments. We're getting ready to wrap up, just about finding a good man to date and to know if it's worth putting in the time.
I mean, that's you up front ask questions. I mean, I've been doing that for some time now. Ask deep, meaningful questions, such as what have been some of your greatest fears and some of your greatest pain points, and how have you worked through them? And what's prevalent for you today? Like really on the first date, on the second date, ask those questions. I mean, the live video ended for some reason, but that's okay. Literally ask those questions. What are you facing right now that's really challenging you? What do you value most? Tell me your top 5 values. Where do you spend most of your time? What's the quote unquote worst thing you've ever done? Have you ever been unfaithful in a relationship? What type of relationship do you want? Do you want to be monogamous or non-monogamous? As a broad brushstroke example. And if you want to be non-monogamous, what does that look like? And actually, what does monogamy look like for you? Do you want children? Have you been married before? Why did your marriage end? What was the longest term relationship that you've been in, and why did that end? And how did it end? And how do you feel about that? What was the greatest love that you've had? And why? And what does that feel for you? How do you feel about that now? Talk to me about your relationship to your father. Talk to me about your relationship to your mother. Describe your childhood in 5 words. I've just given you a heap of questions that can give you tremendous insight into these are practical, pragmatic questions you can ask on the first, second, third date. I mean, talk to me about sex. Do you experience pain when having sex? What does that actually mean to you? What are some of your sexual fantasies? Maybe that's not a question you ask on the first date, depending on your dynamic. Maybe it is though. Maybe it is. There's so many questions you can ask, and that's what it really comes down to.
And I think what you're saying is sometimes we put more investment in our house, in our car, and even what purse we're going to buy than the person that we want to invest our body and our time with.
Correct.
And, two things that I also advise people to ask, and it's very simple, and it's always obviously if they're not polygamous and they're not in multiple relationships, is why are you single, right? Because when you ask that question, how someone responds, if they're completely blaming everyone else, well, she's done this or all these other things, and not taking any responsibility for their own growth, it can also be telling. But the other part of it is to move in moderation. Sometimes what I'll see, Steph, is when people move sexually too quickly, they can mistake intensity for intimacy.
Yes.
And then it clouds their judgment going forward when you don't even know his mom's first name, right?
Yep.
But yet you're already investing your body and creating that chemical coction that will keep you going back. And then you start making excuses for the red flags, and you become a red flag collector.
Yeah,
so
it's addictive.
It's very addictive.
That hormonal process that we go through when we meet someone sexually for the first time, it becomes addictive, and you're right, it hooks us. It really does. And also, to add to those questions that you just mentioned, we can also speak to, what are some of your greatest joys in your life? How long have you been single? This is a really good question. When you said single, what's the longest period of time you've been single for? And the last 15 years, how long have you been single for? What's a period? That's an important question to ask as well. And why have you been single? That's a really great question. I love that one. I've used that one myself as well.
Mm-hmm. So I see a question from Terry, and we're going to end with this question because I want to respect your time, and then I'll ask you how people can sign up for Reclaim Your Kingdom. But Terry's asking, finding that men are intimidated by strong, independent women who are financially successful. Is this rooted in insecurity or a genuine need to feel like a provider?
Could be a combination of both. One or the other is the response. Again, it depends so much on so many other variables. For the majority of the part, it's actually both. We do have an inherent need and a conditioning as men to provide, and sometimes we're threatened and we feel emasculated, not by the woman doing that by her, and sometimes she does do that by her actions, but not her purposely doing that. And also, it's sometimes just really intimidating for men that aren't confident in themselves to not be the provider, and it's not about being dominant. It's just not about having power. They feel that they've lost their power, and it can be really, really painful. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from a narcissistic place, or it doesn't have to necessarily come from a place of ill intent. It's just dealing with those feelings is actually really important. It contributes to our growth, and then it can propel us to say, okay, what can we do to really provide in the way that is meaningful for us, that we feel fulfilled in life? And there's an opportunity to do that. But unfortunately, most men focus on the pain instead of focusing on how they can grow from it.
And the one thing I would also add to that, Terry, is also, if you are the breadwinner, or if a female is a breadwinner and she relates to that, is how do you showcase that, right? Because sometimes I can also see it on the other hand, where women also define themselves through that, and can not necessarily and can create insecurities that wouldn't have otherwise been there if validation wasn't sorted through that way. So, this conversation can go on and on.
Yeah.
We can go in all different ways with this, but the conversation continues. And I just want to thank you so much for your work with Reclaim the Kingdom and having these tough conversations, because a lot of people stay away from these conversations. And just going back to some of the comments that people were making with your transparency and your heart for men and having a good balanced view of that. So tell us a little bit about how people can find you, follow you, and then when is your next Reclaim Your Kingdom, and how can they enroll in that, and what can they expect from it?
Thank you, Janie. Thank you so much. So you can find me on Instagram or Facebook or any social media handle as Stefanos Sifandos. You can, in my website, www.stefanosstefandos.com, and reclaimyourkingdom.com as well. And that kicks off July 17th. What can men expect? It's a course for men. It's an 8-week journey for men. There's a brotherhood that we meet every week live. There's live trainings, live teachings every week. There's rich learning materials and lessons and videos as well, and a heap of bonuses. You can check it all out on reclaimyourkingdom.com. And what can they expect? They can expect transformation. Essentially, they can expect support and challenge. They can expect to grow out of what they thought was, what does it mean to be a man? Or maybe they didn't have any ideas, to getting some clue and idea of what it means to be a man in contemporary times, how to deal with difficult situations in an appropriate and healthy way, how to also, I call a big part of it is conscious courting. I call it conscious courting or conscious pickup artistry, because I really don't like pickup artistry and what it represents. So I want to teach men how to communicate and connect with women or other human beings in an intimate way that is actually real and truthful and transparent and open, and not bullshit and not manipulative and not underhanded and not coming from the shadow and not coming from a very hyper selfish place. So that's a big part of it as well. And the results men get in terms of the intimacy they experience and the freedom in that intimacy is profound. I want to help men manage and express their emotions as well, but learn about real manhood and masculinity, connect back into their bodies and get vital and healthy. Health and vitality is a key principle out of the 8 principles. Mindset is another one as well. Purpose is another one, where we go into the pillars of masculinity and the tactical virtues of masculinity as well. Leadership's a big part of it too. There's just so much in this course. I'm super excited, if you can't tell.
And I just love it. I so appreciate this course. Someone's sent a message. What's the age requirement? She wanted to send her son. Do you have to be 18 or older?
No, you don't actually. Not at all. No, I've had as young as 13 on the course. There's no problem. Yeah.
Okay. So a teenager would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a rite of passage. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the people that I've recommended to your program, their feedback as well. So what do you have coming up that we can look out for?
Yeah, so I've got that coming up July 17th. Of course, I've started intakes for that. My beloved and I, we're teaching in October in London. We have a 1-day event on relationships, love, and love to self, love and intimacy, in intimate relationships. And love to a higher source as well. And so there's more information coming out about that. In November, we're doing the same course in San Diego as well. That's exciting. I think it's November 7th or 9th, but that will all be up on my website soon, and in Christine's website, christinehassler.com. And we're also running a retreat in Hawaii in September. And there's a couple of spaces left for that as well. So that is christinehassler.com/Hawaii. And you can find out more information there. And that's going to be a really fun week. And that's open to everyone as well. So men, women, couples, doesn't matter how you identify, come along.
All right. And we will go ahead and put Christine as well as your links on this live. So if you didn't catch that, we will make sure you have that. And I highly, highly recommend following them both and taking advantage of this powerful couple and teaching us about healthy relationships. So thank you for joining us. And we hope you all have a great evening. And thank you so much, Steph.
Thank you, Janie. Appreciate it.